Hello again, everybody. We're in the middle of Storm Bert or Ernie or whichever one it is at the moment. So it's horrible outside. There's a lot of high winds and rain and flooding. I might even later on put my wellies and various other supposedly waterproof items on and nip out on one of the Tiger Cubs to do a bit of filming and see what we got down in the way of branches and floods and whatever. Possibly, we'll see. But anyway, all this crap weather certainly puts you in a good mood to have a good rant, doesn't it? And this one is inspired by a Facebook sort of conversation in a group. And I'm not taking a pop at the guy I was sort of conversing with. It could have turned into an argument, but it didn't, and everything's fine, and I'll put my hands up. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, of course. But Triumph Tiger Cub came up, among other things, and somebody then said, it was the usual, they were great little bikes and whatever, and somebody brought up the Honda RS250, and said that was the bike that the Tiger Cub should have been. And I took issue with that, really, because I thought that was a bit unfair, in that there was about a 20-year gap between them for a start off, and it wasn't really a fair comparison. Although, as far as comparisons go, I suggested actually closer to the mark would have been the Kawasaki Z200 from, I think, the late 70s or early 80s. Which again was about 20 years down the line from the Tiger Cub. And interestingly enough, I remember Motorcycle News, I think Motorcycle Weekly had gone by then, but it was in the certainly in the early 80s, and someone came up with the idea of doing a sort of comparison of a contemporary road test of a Triumph Sports Cub against the Kawasaki Z200. And out of interest, I think I can remember the numbers. I think they got 74 miles an hour out of the Z200, and they got 78 miles an hour out of the Sports Cub. Believe it or not, the Sports Cub somehow managed a shorter stopping distance than the Kawasaki, which had a disc brake on the front of it, although admittedly it was a cable-operated disc. The Kawasaki also had 5 gears, 12 volts, and electric start, so it had a lot more sort of finesse and gadgetry about it, but nevertheless, the Sports Cub, on paper, test compared against test, actually beat it in performance. And I think it delivered a better miles to the gallon figure as well, actually. So, I think, and I don't think anything's ever going to change my mind on this, that the Triumph Tiger Cub must have been a great little bike in its day. And I say in its day, must have been, because I wasn't around. I think I would have probably been about 3 or 4 years old when the last Tiger Cub was produced new. So I wasn't around in their heyday, but much later on, I fell in love with them, and I think they're great little bikes. And perhaps I'm a bit blinkered and biased even, but I try and sort of judge things on their merits, and I just think that they are great bikes. But there can be some real stinkers, but that's usually down to who's owned them before and what's been done to them, and so on. And we've got one in the workshop at the moment that's been, shall we say, restored. I've got the engine totally stripped anyway, because someone goofed up with the main bearing. So as a result of that, the engine, it sounded actually fairly good, but wasn't in the best of health, and it wasn't going to get better. So we're dealing with that one. But it sort of cropped up then. There was a little batting back and forth that, well, actually, because I'd said that the Honda CB250 RS was 20 years younger than the Cub, the guy sort of responded with, well, it can be traced back to the XL250, which was launched in 1972. Okay, the Tiger Cub can be traced back to the first Terrier, which preceded it and was made alongside it for a short while, to 1952. So there we are, back with a 20-year gap again. Now, it's very easy to sort of say, oh, well, it's only 20 years. And in fact, the Motorcycle News road test of the Z200 against the Tiger Cub Sports, its parting shot was something along the lines of I wonder how far we've actually come in the last 20 years. Always remember that bit. But 20 years can be a long time for progress and technical advancements and whatever, especially perhaps now going back way before my time and to machines that don't really interest me that much. But the motorcycle, give or take a few years, appeared around about 1900, a little bit before, maybe a couple of years before. Let's say 1900, and if you sort of take a look at anything that was made around 1900, compare it to something made in 1920. Now, anything made in 1920 would be the bike that the 1900 machine should have been, but things have to be developed, ideas have to be sourced and created and put into metal and plastic. Things have to be made to then find out what can be improved and what can be advanced. Now, the Tiger Cub wasn't static in its 1954 to 1967 or so production run. They weren't the same. There's a lot of interchangeable bits and pieces on them, but you didn't have the same engine in a 1967 Tiger Cub as you had in a 1954 one. There was all sorts of things inside and outside in the engine and everywhere else that were changed and updated and modified and improved and whatever. They didn't stand still, and the very last of the Tiger Cubs, which really, the engine I've got in this one is a bit more recent than the rolling chassis. That's that's one of the last engines in that one. By the time they came out with that one, with the roller big end and the main bearings on both sides rather than the timing side bush and whatever, they'd really cracked it. But the Triumph and BSA were in trouble by then, and it cost a lot of money to produce small bikes, not far off as much as it did to produce big ones. So the big ones were their main interest, so the Tiger Cub got dropped. Now, there had been plans to update the Tiger Cub design completely. I've seen pictures and drawings of stuff, but they never went ahead. But the ideas were there, and the intention was there for a little while as well. But at the end of its life, the Tiger Cub was probably becoming a little old-fashioned, but still holding the fort. And this very bike behind me, actually, I bought that when I was 17 years old. That one, it was an absolute heap of crap when I bought it, and I gradually sort of improved it because I was using these bikes not as old bikes, not as ornaments. I was using them to get to and from work and my social life and everything. And so I grabbed a better engine than the pile of crap that was in it when I bought it, which was absolutely terrible, thanks to the cowboy that put the thing together. And running, I think I robbed the engine out of my Trials Cub, actually, which I bought when I was 15. Put it in this one, and there was 1 year, I remember 1 year, where I did about 18,000 miles on it. And then after that, a friend of mine crashed his bike and he needed something to get him to and from work, and I lent him this one, as it was back then, and he had it for about a year or so, and he did another 18,000 miles or so on it. And it came back to me, and it was very, very tatty and worn out looking, but it was still running and moving under its own power. Although soon after, the big end started to rattle a bit, and I had to strip the engine and rebuild it. And that engine is the one, once it was rebuilt, that went into my blue and white Sports Cub, which is still with me now. So let's say north of 40,000 miles out of a second-hand Tiger Cub engine before it needed taking to bits and rebuilding. Now, I don't think that's too bad, and I would bet there's a lot of Japanese bikes around that probably need some attention by 40,000 miles, and I can think of a glaring example, and I got it right here, my Honda CB500T. I know with that one that sometimes you're heading for trouble at about 20,000 miles if you're not careful with the cam chain adjustment and the oil changes and so on. And I've had to rebuild CB500T engines quite a few times in my years since 1983 with my example. It's a great bike, lovely to ride, But you are wondering, you look at the miles on the speedometer and they're mounting up, and you're just thinking, how much longer am I going to get out this cam chain? And if I don't change it soon, perhaps something will go wrong or whatever. It also mysteriously lost top gear on me once. That was an engine out and split the cases to get at the problem in there. I've owned a CB125S whose camshaft just broke at the end where the points mechanism spins on the end of the camshaft. I've owned a CB175 Honda which was very well looked after by previous owners and myself, and all of a sudden it started misfiring and stopped. For some reason the camshaft had broke in half on that one. So things can and do go wrong with the Japanese bikes as well. The idea that British bikes break down and things wear out and drop off and everything, alright, that's fine, but to say that, or try and make out that it doesn't happen on Japanese bikes is a load of nonsense, because it can and it does, and it will. Another example, there was a lot, I've had a few myself, around my area when I was a youngster. There were a lot of Suzuki two-stroke twins about the place, and you'd be amazed how many of them were holding pistons, and I think the Yamaha RDs were as well, actually. Nothing exciting or out of the ordinary to hear of so-and-so's got a hold piston in his RD250 or his Hustler or whatever. So I won't be told that Japanese bikes are better than British ones. They're from different eras, really, and the early Japanese bikes certainly must have had their own issues, because they got updated very, very frequently and redesigned and reworked and whatever. But to sort of dismiss something like the Tiger Cub as being outdated back in its day, I think that's a little bit harsh and a little bit unfair, because the development was being done, but the focus really was on the big bikes, and perhaps they didn't get the attention that they should have had. But certainly I could probably sit for hours, dig some parts books out and whatever if I really wanted to, and go through loads and loads of little detail changes and bigger ones and whatever from the start to the finish of production. So they didn't just say, right, 1954, here's your Tiger Cub, and just change wheel sizes and things. They actually did a lot of development work to those machines. So it's always worth bearing in mind when you want to dismiss British bikes, and the smaller ones especially, as being inferior to Japanese machines that came 20 years later. Well, 20 years, like I said at the beginning, that's a very, very long time. Perhaps it would be good to sort of bear that 20-year gap in mind when comparing such machines. I mean, it's obvious, really, or it should be obvious, that the newer machine, by 20 years, is going to be superior in many ways. But that doesn't mean that the Tiger Cub was crap in its day. And a lot of them got a lot of young people around, faced a lot of abuse and hard times and bad servicing, and a lot of them are still here now. And I must say, actually, and disregarding my own little collection of Tiger Cubs, over the years, I think in this area, I've seen more Triumph Tiger Cubs about the place than I have CB250RS Hondas. I think I can think of two around back in the day, and it's a long, long time since I've seen one. And they produced 100,000 or thereabouts Triumph Tiger Cubs. I'm not sure how many CB250RS they produced, but if we could get a total production number of those and find out the percentage of the survivors today compared with the Tiger Cub, I would wager that the Tiger Cub probably has a higher percentage of survivors since production ended. Just something to ponder on a horrible wet day. Thanks for listening to all my drivel as usual. Thanks for watching.